The Culinary Institute of Galactic Excellence hung like a silver jewel against the swirling orange storms of Icarus V, within its transparent domes and spiraling towers. The greatest chefs from 100 worlds refined their craft using technology that would have seemed like magic to earlier civilizations. Molecular synthesizers hummed alongside quantum flavor extractors, while holographic kitchens allowed students to practice with ingredients from across the galaxy without ever touching physical matter. Chef Vrix adjusted the electromagnetic field around their latest creation with practiced precision. As a Vortan, their elongated fingers were perfectly evolved for manipulating the subtle energy currents that their species used for cooking. The protein sculpture before them shimmered with perfect temperature gradients, each layer precisely calibrated to achieve optimal texture and flavor release. Around them, the kitchen bay thrummed with similar displays of technological mastery. A Clithra student nearby was using gravitational microfields to create impossibly delicate pastry layers that defied conventional physics, while a Xenthar protein smith employed sonic vibrations to tenderize meat at the molecular level. "Attention, students," announced the Academy's central AI, its voice resonating through neural implants and translation matrices. "Director Zephon requests all senior chefs report to the Grand Amphitheater for an important announcement." Vrix deactivated their cooking field with a thought and glided toward the amphitheater, their peers falling in beside them. The Clithra student, who went by the name Bixley, bounced along on their 4 legs, their spotted fur rippling with excitement. "Wonder what this is about," Bixley chirped through their translator. "Maybe they're finally installing those new time dilution ovens." "Unlikely," rumbled Korthak, the Xenthar protein smith. Their rocky exterior ground slightly as they moved, leaving a faint trail of mineral dust. "The Academy rarely calls general assemblies for equipment updates." The Grand Amphitheater curved around them like the inside of a seashell, its acoustics perfect for addressing the diverse hearing ranges of multiple species. Director Zephin, a being of pure energy contained within a humanoid-shaped field, flickered into existence at the center stage. "Esteemed chefs," Zephon began, their voice a harmony of frequencies. "The Galactic Culinary Council has issued a challenge that will test not just your skills, but your very understanding of what it means to create food. You must prepare a 5-star meal using only pre-industrial tools. No synthesizers, no energy fields, no molecular manipulation. Only the most primitive methods will be permitted." A ripple of confusion passed through the assembled chefs. Vrix's chromatophores shifted to a puzzled purple. Pre-industrial? The concept was almost incomprehensible. How did one cook without proper temperature control, without molecular precision? "Furthermore," Zephon continued, "to ensure authenticity, this challenge will take place on the desert moon Thalos, where a human settlement maintains what they call traditional methods. You will have 3 days to prepare your submissions. Transport leaves in 6 hours. The amphitheater erupted in discussion as chefs turned to one another in bewilderment. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as an adaptable species, but their insistence on maintaining primitive practices alongside advanced technology was often seen as quaint at best, inefficient at worst. 6 hours later, Vrix found themselves aboard a transport shuttle with Bixley, Korthak, and several other senior chefs, descending through Thalos's thin atmosphere. The moon's surface spread below them like a vast canvas of rust and gold, broken only by ancient canyons and the occasional impact crater. In the distance, a small cluster of structures marked the human outpost. The landing was rough, the shuttle's anti-gravity system struggling with the moon's irregular magnetic field. As the airlock hissed open, Vrix's first sensation was the heat, raw, unfiltered, and utterly unlike the precisely controlled environments they were accustomed to. The air smelled of dust and something else, something organic and unfamiliar. The human settlement sprawled before them in a seemingly haphazard collection of polymer shelters and metal structures. But what caught Vrix's attention immediately was the smoke rising from several points throughout the camp. Actual, combustion. The very idea made their digestive sac churn with unease. A human woman approached them, her skin bronzed by exposure to natural radiation, her movements efficient despite the lower gravity. She wore practical clothing suited to the harsh environment, and her eyes held a warmth that seemed to mirror the desert heat. "Welcome to Camp Prometheus," she said, her voice carrying without the aid of amplifiers. "I'm Leah Marlowe, your liaison for this challenge. I understand you're here to learn about traditional cooking methods." Vrix's translator rendered her words perfectly, but the concept still seemed abstract. "Traditional," they repeated, tasting the word. "You mean primitive?" Leah's smile didn't falter, though something sharp flickered in her eyes. "I prefer foundational. Everything your fancy molecular synthesizers do started with understanding these basics. Fire, heat, smoke, the transformation of raw into cooked." She gestured toward the camp. "Come on, let me show you where you'll be working." The tour that followed was a revelation of limitations. The camp's kitchen consisted of several fire pits, some basic metal grates, collections of pots and pans that looked handmade, and stores of ingredients that hadn't seen the inside of a stasis field. Vrix's analytical mind reeled at the variables: inconsistent heat, uncontrolled atmospheric pressure, ingredients subject to oxidation and decay. "This is impossible," Korthak stated flatly, their voice like grinding stone. "My species requires precise temperature control to achieve proper protein denaturation. These fires, they fluctuate constantly." "That's where skill comes in," Leah said, kneeling beside one of the cold fire pits. "You learn to read the flames, to understand the coals. You use your senses, sight, smell, even sound, to gauge when something's ready." "But the margin for error," Bixley squeaked, their fur standing on end with anxiety. "My pastries require exact measurements, controlled humidity, precise timing." "All achievable," Leah interrupted gently. "Just differently. Humans have been baking bread for thousands of years without a single molecular scanner. Here, let me show you something." She gathered materials with practiced ease: dried plant matter, small twigs, larger pieces of a fibrous wood. From a pouch at her belt, she produced 2 stones. First lesson: making fire. The aliens watched in fascination as she struck the stones together, producing sparks that fell onto the dried matter. She leaned in, breathing gently on the tiny ember until it glowed brighter, then burst into flame. The process took less than a minute, but Vrix found themselves mesmerized by the primal transformation. "Fire is alive," Leah explained as she fed the growing flames. "It needs air to breathe, fuel to eat. Too much of either, and it rages out of control. Too little, and it dies. You have to find the balance." She demonstrated different configurations: a high flame for quick searing, a bed of coals for steady heat, arrangements of wood that created smoke for flavoring. The other chefs attempted to replicate her actions with varying degrees of failure. Korthak's heavy hands crushed the delicate tinder, while Bixley's nervous movements scattered the carefully arranged kindling. Vrix approached the task with their usual analytical mindset, calculating angles and force vectors for the striking stones. But something was missing. The sparks flew, but no ember caught. They tried again, adjusting their technique based on observation, but still nothing. "You're overthinking it," Leah said, crouching beside them. "Feel the stones. Don't just calculate. Listen to the sound they make. Watch where the sparks want to fall. Want to fall." Sparks didn't want anything. They followed predictable trajectories based on force and angle, and yet, as Vrix watched Leah demonstrate again, there was something almost intuitive about her movements. She wasn't calculating. She was responding to subtle cues that their analytical mind was filtering out as irrelevant. As the local sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, The alien chefs had managed to create only a few fitful fires, most of which died quickly. Leah moved between them, offering guidance and encouragement, but the gulf between their technological expertise and this elemental skill seemed insurmountable. "Tomorrow, we'll start with the actual cooking," Leah announced as they gathered around the largest fire pit, where she had built a steady blaze. "But tonight, I want you to just watch the fire. Notice how it moves, how it changes." Fire was humanity's first technology, the thing that started our journey to the stars. There's wisdom in it, if you're willing to learn. Vrix settled their elongated form onto the sandy ground, their optical organs fixed on the dancing flames. Around them, their fellow chefs did the same, each processing this experience through their species' unique perceptions. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky where they competed briefly with the emerging stars. As the night deepened, something shifted in Vrix's perception. The seemingly chaotic movement of the flames began to reveal patterns, convection currents visible in the heated air, the progressive consumption of fuel following logical sequences, the relationship between oxygen flow and flame intensity. It wasn't random at all, merely complex in a way their instruments had always simplified for them. "I think I begin to understand," Vrix murmured, surprising themselves with the admission. Leah, who had been quietly tending the fire, looked up with interest. "Oh? Your fire is not primitive," Vrix continued, their chromatophores shifting to a thoughtful blue-green. "It is fundamental. We have built layers of technology to control these reactions, but we have lost touch with the reactions themselves. That's the beginning of wisdom," Leah said with a smile. "Tomorrow, we'll put that understanding to use." The next morning came too quickly, bringing with it the full challenge of their situation. The Academy had provided basic ingredients, proteins, grains, vegetables, fruits, but all in their raw, unprocessed forms. No pre-measured portions, no molecular tags indicating optimal cooking temperatures, no synthetic flavor enhancers. "Right," Leah said, addressing the assembled chefs. "Today, we cook. Let's start simple. Each of you will prepare a basic protein over the fire." She demonstrated first, selecting a cut of meat from the supplies. "See the marbling here? That fat will render out, basting the meat as it cooks. But too much heat too fast and the outside burns while the inside stays raw." She prepared a bed of coals to one side of the fire pit, explaining how the radiant heat would cook more evenly than direct flames. The meat sizzled as she placed it on a simple metal grate, and immediately the air filled with an aroma that made even the alien olfactory organs take notice. "Now, this is where your senses come in," Leah continued, watching the meat carefully. "Listen to the sizzle. Too loud and your heat's too high. Watch the edges. They'll tell you when to flip. Smell the smoke. Different woods give different flavors." The chefs attempted to replicate her actions with varying results. Bixley, used to precision timing, flipped their meat too frequently, preventing proper caramelization. Korthak's protein literally caught fire, requiring Leah's quick intervention with a spray of water. Vrix managed better, their analytical nature helping them recognize the visual cues Leah had mentioned, but the result was still unevenly cooked. Adequate for survival, Vrix assessed, examining their creation, but hardly five-star cuisine. "We're just getting started," Leah assured them. "Let me show you something else." She led them to a different area where she had arranged stones in a circular pattern. "This is a technique humans have used for millennia. The stones absorb and radiate heat evenly, creating an oven effect." She wrapped vegetables in large leaves, tucked them among the hot stones, and covered everything with sand. "In an hour, those will be perfectly roasted, infused with the herb flavors from the leaves." As the day progressed, Leah introduced them to more techniques: smoking, braising in covered pots, even a primitive form of pressure cooking using sealed containers. Each method required constant attention, adjustment, and a developing intuition for how the food was transforming. It was during a brief break that Leah made a discovery that would change everything. She had wandered to the edge of the camp, foraging for additional herbs, when she spotted an unusual plant growing in the shadow of a rock formation. Its pods were a deep purple, almost black, with a crystalline coating that sparkled in the harsh sunlight. "Haven't seen these before," she muttered, carefully harvesting a few pods. Back at the fire, she held one near the heat experimentally. The pod suddenly burst open, releasing a cloud of aromatic particles that made everyone in the vicinity stop what they were doing. "What is that smell?" Bixley asked, their sensitive nose quivering with interest. Leah carefully extracted the seeds from the open pod and tasted one cautiously. Her eyes widened. "It's like umami, but more deeper. And there's a sweetness that comes after. And then a kind of electric sensation." Vrix extended a sensory appendage and sampled the essence. The flavor was unlike anything in their extensive database. Complex, layered, transformative. It seemed to activate taste receptors they didn't even know they possessed. "This could be the key," Vrix said slowly. "A flavor profile unknown to galactic cuisine, achieved through the most basic of preparations." They spent the rest of the day experimenting with the pods, discovering that different levels of toasting brought out different flavor notes. Direct flame charring produced a smoky bitterness that complemented fatty proteins. Gentle heating in sand created a sweet, almost floral essence perfect for desserts. Crushing the raw seeds released oils that could be used as a finishing touch. Word of their discovery spread through the camp, and soon other teams of chefs were incorporating the spice pods into their preparations. But it was Vrix's team, under Leah's guidance, that began to truly understand how to balance the new flavor with their fire-based cooking techniques. On the morning of the third day, disaster struck. The supply shuttle that was supposed to bring the Academy judges experienced a malfunction and arrived 6 hours early. The teams were barely beginning their prep work when the announcement came through their communicators. "Judges are here," Korthak reported, their usual stoicism cracking slightly. "We have less than 2 hours to prepare a 5-star meal." Panic rippled through the camp. Most teams had been planning elaborate multi-course presentations that required hours of preparation. Vrix's chromatophores flashed through a rainbow of stress colors before they forced themselves to calm. "We adapt," Vrix decided, their voice carrying new authority. "Leah, what can we prepare with maximum flavor in minimum time?" Leah's mind raced through possibilities. "We go for intense flavors. Perfect execution of simple dishes. Quality over complexity," she began issuing rapid instructions. "Korthak, get the largest fire going. We need maximum heat for searing. Bixley, start preparing a simple flatbread dough. Vrix, help me with the spice pods. We're going to use every preparation method we've learned." What followed was controlled chaos. The team moved with a synchronization born of 3 days of intense learning. Korthak managed the fires with newfound expertise, reading the flames and adjusting airflow to maintain optimal temperatures. Bixley's nervous energy found focus in kneading dough, their forearms working in perfect rhythm. Vrix and Leah worked side by side, preparing proteins and vegetables with complementary spice pod treatments. Other teams struggled with the time pressure, reverting to their technological instincts and producing dishes that were either undercooked or burned. But Vrix's team had found their rhythm, each member contributing their species' strengths while adapting to the constraints of primitive cooking. As the judges arrived, a panel of distinguished chefs from various worlds, including the legendary Gourmand Prime of Centauri, Vrix's team was putting the finishing touches on their presentation. The makeshift outdoor kitchen, which had seemed so crude 3 days ago, now hummed with purposeful activity. "Esteemed judges," Vrix announced, their chromatophores settled into a confident, deep blue. "We present a meal that celebrates both innovation and tradition, combining techniques thousands of years old with flavors never before experienced in galactic cuisine." The first course was deceptively simple: flatbread toasted on hot stones, topped with vegetables that had been roasted in the coals and finished with cold-pressed spice pod oil. The judges' expressions shifted from skepticism to surprise as the flavors unfolded on their diverse palates. "The char on the vegetables," murmured one judge, a Zalathi whose species prized subtle flavors. "It adds a complexity our molecular cookers struggle to achieve." The main course showcased the full range of their fire mastery: proteins that had been marinated in crushed spice pods, then seared over high heat and finished with slow smoking; grains cooked in sealed pots with aromatics, achieving a creamy consistency without any technological intervention; vegetables prepared 3 ways: grilled, roasted in leaves, and quick-fried in a makeshift wok Leah had fashioned from scrap metal. But it was the dessert that truly impressed. Bixley had discovered that the spice pods, when mixed with local fruit and wrapped in dough, created steam pockets that puffed the pastry while caramelizing the fruit inside. Cooked on a flat stone over dying coals, dusted with sand-toasted pod crystals, it was a perfect marriage of technique and innovation. The judges tasted in silence, their expressions unreadable. Vrix found themselves holding their breath, a human gesture they had unconsciously adopted. The gourmand prime spoke first. "In 5,000 years of culinary evolution," they said slowly, "we have perhaps forgotten that cooking is not merely about controlling chemical reactions. It is about understanding them, partnering with them." They paused, savoring the lingering flavors. "This meal reminds us that mastery comes not from dominating our ingredients with technology, but from listening to what they want to become." The announcement of full stars, the highest rating possible, was almost anticlimactic. What mattered more was the transformation Vrix felt within themselves. The fire no longer seemed like a wild, unpredictable force, but rather a partner in creation. The variations that had once frustrated them now seemed like opportunities for improvisation and discovery. As the judges departed and celebrations began, Leah found Vrix standing apart, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar colors. "So," she said, joining them, "what do you think of primitive cooking now?" Vrix's chromatophores shifted through a pattern Leah had learned meant amusement. "I think perhaps we need a new word. Elemental seems more appropriate, and I think—" They paused, considering. "I think the academy needs a new department. Would you consider a visiting professorship?" Leah laughed, the sound carrying across the cooling desert. "Teaching aliens how to play with fire. How could I refuse?" The weeks that followed saw remarkable changes at the Culinary Institute of Galactic Excellence. A new wing was constructed, specially designed to safely contain open flames while meeting the environmental needs of various species. Leah worked with the Academy's engineers to create hybrid cooking stations that allowed students to transition between high-tech and traditional methods. The first official class in elemental cooking drew students from across the galaxy. Vrix, who had taken a sabbatical from their regular position to assist with the program, watched with satisfaction as young chefs learned to read flames, gauge temperatures by sound and sight, and develop the intuition that no computer could provide. "The key," Leah explained to a group of nervous first-year students, "is understanding that cooking began as a survival skill. Our ancestors gathered around fires not just for warmth, but for community. They learned that food could be more than sustenance. It could be art, culture, connection." She demonstrated the basic fire-starting technique, the same one she had shown Vrix's team weeks before. But now the lesson carried deeper meaning. Each spark represented potential. Each flame a link to countless generations who had performed the same act. Bixley had become an enthusiastic advocate for fusion techniques, developing recipes that used traditional methods to achieve effects impossible with modern technology. Their signature dish, a layered pastry that required alternating between flame charring and coal baking, had become legendary among students. Kortak had perhaps changed the most dramatically. The stoic Xanthar had discovered an affinity for smoke that bordered on artistry. They could identify dozens of different wood types by scent alone, and had begun cultivating relationships with suppliers across multiple worlds to source unique smoking materials. Different worlds, different trees, different flavors, Korthak explained to a documentary crew filming the new program. My homeworld has forests of crystal trees. When burned, they produce smoke that adds mineral notes impossible to replicate synthetically. The spice pods from Thalos had been cultivated and were now grown in the Academy's botanical gardens, but Vrix insisted that students learn to prepare them using traditional methods first. Only after mastering the fire-based techniques were they allowed to experiment with modern applications. One evening, as Vrix supervised an advanced class working on their final projects, they found themselves reflecting on the journey. The kitchen around them was a testament to innovation, fire pits equipped with temperature sensors for safety, extraction systems that could handle smoke from a dozen different cooking methods, students from species that had never seen natural flame learning to dance with it like their ancestors might have. You seem contemplative, Leah observed, joining them on the observation deck. I was thinking about your question during the challenge, Vrix replied. About what essential skills we might be losing in our pursuit of innovation. And what conclusion have you reached? Vrix's chromatophores shifted to a pattern Leah had come to recognize as deep satisfaction. That perhaps the question is wrong. It's not about losing skills. It's about remembering that our technology should enhance our understanding, not replace it. Every molecular gastronomy technique has its roots in something our ancestors did around a fire. We just forgot to maintain the connection. Below them, a young Andromedan student successfully started their first fire, their telepathic excitement rippling through the room and making the other students cheer. The flame was small, uncertain, but it was theirs, created not by pressing a button or thinking a command, but by understanding the fundamental reaction that had launched 1,000 civilizations toward the stars. Fire was our first teacher, Leah said softly. It taught us patience, respect for nature's power, the transformation of raw into refined. Everything else we've achieved builds on those lessons. Vrix nodded, their sensory appendages detecting the complex aromatic signatures rising from the kitchen below, smoke and char, caramelization and herbs, the essence of ingredients transformed by the most ancient of human technologies. And now it teaches us again, full circle. The Academy's viewing walls showed the swirling storms of Icarus V, the distant stars, the technological marvel that was their floating institution. But in the elemental cooking wing, students gathered around flames as beings had done since the dawn of consciousness, learning not just to cook, but to understand the very foundations of transformation. Months passed, and the program grew. Exchange initiatives were established with traditional cooking settlements on various worlds. The Clithra home planet revealed ancient sugar crystallization techniques using volcanic heat. The Xanthar shared stone cooking methods that predated their species' technological age by millions of years. Even the energy-based Zephonians found ways to participate, manipulating flames with their fields in ways that created entirely new cooking possibilities. Vrix published a treatise on integrative culinary philosophy that became required reading at academies across the galaxy. In it, they argued that true mastery required not choosing between traditional and modern methods, but understanding how each informed the other. The molecular scanner tells us when proteins denature, they wrote. But the sizzle of meat on hot stone tells us when they sing. The synthesizer can replicate any flavor profile, but smoke carries stories of the wood that burned, the hands that tended the fire, the moments of discovery when someone first realized that heat could transform the inedible into the sublime. Leah, reading the treatise in her quarters aboard the Academy, smiled at a particular passage. My human colleague taught me that cooking is not about controlling reactions, but about participating in them. When we step back from our instruments and engage with our ingredients directly, we find that they have been waiting to teach us all along. She set down the reader and walked to the window, looking out at the desert moon of Thalos rotating slowly below. The camp was still there, still maintaining its traditional ways, but now it hosted regular expeditions of culinary students eager to learn the fundamentals of fire-based cooking. A soft chime announced a visitor. Vrix entered, their chromatophores displaying the easy patterns of friendship. "The new semester starts tomorrow," they said. "Are you ready for another batch of students who think fire is a primitive technology?" Leah grinned. "Let them think that. They all change their minds by the end of the first week. Remember your first fire?" How could I forget? I approached it like an equation to be solved, rather than a relationship to be built. Vrix settled their form into what humans would recognize as a relaxed posture. Speaking of building relationships, I've been corresponding with the archaeological department. They've uncovered evidence of ancient Vortan fire rituals. My own species apparently had a rich tradition of flame-based cooking before we developed electromagnetic manipulation. Full circle indeed, Leah mused. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that we need to abandon technology, but that we need to remember where it came from. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the academy, students were preparing for tomorrow's lessons, perhaps nervous about working with open flame, unaware that they were about to connect with something fundamental about consciousness itself, the moment when beings first decided to partner with fire and, in doing so, began the long journey toward the stars. The elemental cooking program's influence spread beyond the culinary world. Anthropologists began studying how different species had developed cooking technologies. Engineers started incorporating traditional principles into new designs. A renaissance of foundational technology studies emerged across multiple disciplines. One particularly memorable moment came when a group of mechanist students, beings who had replaced most of their organic components with technology, attended a fire-starting workshop. Their initial skepticism, "We have fusion reactors in our chest cavities," gave way to fascination as they discovered that understanding the basic principles of combustion gave them new insights into their own power systems. "Fire is just rapid oxidation," one of them mused, successfully creating their first flame with flint and steel. But knowing that intellectually is different from feeling the heat build, seeing the ember catch, breathing life into flame. There's poetry in it. Vrix had begun leading expeditions to Thalos, taking advanced students to forage for ingredients and cook in the original outdoor kitchen where their journey had begun. The spice pods had become cultivated on many worlds, but Vrix insisted that finding them wild, preparing them over an open flame in the desert where they grew, created flavors that no controlled environment could match. Terroir, Leah had taught them, the taste of place. It wasn't just about soil composition and climate, measurable factors that could be replicated. It was about the entire experience. The desert wind carrying sand and ancient minerals, the specific combination of native woods used for the fire, the way the harsh environment concentrated flavors in the pods. During one such expedition, a student asked Vrix the question that had haunted the first days of their challenge. But why bother with such imprecise methods when we have perfect control through technology? Vrix's response had evolved from their initial journey. Perfect control assumes we know all the variables worth controlling. But fire teaches us humility. It shows us effects we didn't know to look for, interactions we couldn't predict. Every time I cook over flame, I discover something new. A way smoke curls that suggests a different arrangement of coals. A sound that indicates the perfect moment to add herbs. Technology gives us precision, but fire gives us discovery. The Academy's annual culinary showcase had transformed as well. Where once it had been a display of technological marvels, foods that defied physics, flavors that existed only in synthetic combinations, now it included a balance. Students proudly presented dishes that combined ancient techniques with modern understanding. A Centaurian student created a dessert that used computer modeling to predict optimal coal arrangements for even heating, then hand-tended the fire to achieve results the computer couldn't anticipate. A collective from the hive worlds demonstrated how their species' ancestral group cooking methods around massive fires created social bonds that enhanced flavor perception through shared pheromone release. Leah had expanded her teaching to include the cultural aspects of fire-based cooking. She brought in human historians to discuss how the hearth had been the center of homes for millennia. Anthropologists to explain how cooking food had allowed human ancestors to develop larger brains, and even poets to explore the metaphorical significance of transformation through fire. "Cooking is the oldest art," she told her students. "Before we painted on cave walls, before we developed language complex enough for stories, we gathered around fires and transformed raw nature into culture. Every meal we make connects us to that first moment when someone decided that food could be more than fuel. It could be an expression of creativity, care, and community." The influence reached even further when the Galactic Council of Sciences invited Vrix and Leah to present their findings on integrated learning approaches. Their presentation, "The Fire Paradox: How Ancient Technology Enhances Modern Understanding," challenged assumptions across multiple fields. "We propose," Vrix stated to the assembled scientists, "that technological advancement should not be measured solely by complexity or capability, but by depth of understanding. A chef who can only operate a molecular synthesizer knows less about cooking than one who can read flames and adjust intuitively. The synthesizer operator follows protocols. The fire tender engages in active dialogue with their medium." The presentation sparked debates that continued for months. Some argued that returning to primitive methods was a romantic waste of time. Others saw the value in maintaining connections to foundational technologies. But the results spoke for themselves. Chefs trained in both methods consistently outperformed those trained in only one, showing more creativity, better problem-solving skills, and deeper understanding of culinary principles. Years later, as Vrix stood in their own kitchen, a space that seamlessly blended fire pits with molecular equipment, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The Academy had fully embraced the integrated approach, and elemental studies had become a required course for all students, not just those in culinary arts. Leah had established a permanent campus on Thalos, where students from across the galaxy came to study not just cooking, but the fundamental relationship between consciousness and technology. The desert moon had become a symbol of preserved wisdom, a place where the most advanced civilizations came to remember their roots. The evening's menu was a testament to how far they had come. Vrix prepared dishes that would have been impossible without their technological training, but each one was grounded in techniques learned around the fire. The spice pods from Thalos were prepared 7 different ways, their flavors layered and combined with ingredients from a dozen worlds. But at the heart of each dish was the transformative power of flame, controlled, understood, and respected. A new student, fresh from a world where cooking had been fully automated for generations, watched nervously as Vrix demonstrated the evening's technique. "I've never seen actual fire before," they admitted. "On my planet, it's considered too dangerous for general use." Vrix's chromatophores displayed understanding. "I once thought the same. Fire seemed chaotic, uncontrollable, primitive. But chaos and control are not opposites. They're partners. Watch." They demonstrated how to build the fire, explaining each step not just in terms of technique, but philosophy. The wood is potential energy, stored sunlight. The spark is catalyst. The air is life. When we cook with fire, we're not just applying heat, we're facilitating a conversation between elements that have been dancing together since the birth of stars. The students' nervousness gave way to wonder as they successfully created their first flame. Around them, the kitchen hummed with activity, some students working with the most advanced equipment known to the galaxy. others tending fires with the same careful attention their species' ancestors might have shown millions of years ago. "This is the future," Leah said, joining Vrix to watch the evening service, not choosing between old and new, but understanding how each informs the other. Vrix agreed, their sensory appendages detecting the complex symphony of aromas filling the space. Smoke and synthesis, tradition and innovation, the eternal transformation of raw into refined. "We thought we were learning to cook without technology," they mused. "Instead, we learned that fire was the first technology, and everything else is just elaboration on that theme." As the evening progressed, diners from across the galaxy experienced meals that told stories of ancient traditions preserved and reimagined, of the moment when conscious beings first decided to improve upon nature, of the continuing journey toward understanding that began with a spark and would continue as long as beings sought to create and share and transform. The fire in the central hearth burned steadily, its light reflecting off advanced alloys and traditional stone alike. Students and masters worked side by side, some monitoring readings on holographic displays, others gauging temperature by the color of coals and the sound of sizzling. The integration was complete, not a replacement of one method by another, but a true synthesis that honored both. In his final notes for the evening, Vrix wrote, "Today a student asked me which was better, molecular precision or fire intuition. I told them it was like asking which was better, breathing in or breathing out. The question misses the point. Mastery comes not from choosing but from integrating, not from controlling but from understanding, not from abandoning our roots but from letting them inform our reach toward the stars." The entry complete. Vrix returned to the kitchen where Leah was teaching a group of advanced students the subtle art of reading smoke patterns. The scene could have been from any era, beings gathered around fire, learning, sharing, transforming raw materials into sustenance and art. But the context was utterly modern, the understanding enhanced by centuries of scientific knowledge, the possibilities expanded by contact between species that had each developed their own relationships with the transformative power of heat. This was the true gift of the elemental cooking program, not a retreat into the past, but a recognition that the past lived within the present, that every advanced technique had roots in basic principles, that understanding came not from transcending origins, but from integrating them into an ever-expanding whole. As the night deepened and the cooking fires were banked to glowing coals, students cleaned up using both traditional methods and modern conveniences. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new ways of understanding the ancient dance between flame and food. But tonight, they had participated in something timeless, the gathering of conscious beings around fire, sharing knowledge and sustenance, continuing a tradition as old as consciousness itself and as new as the latest innovation. The stars wheeled overhead, distant suns burning with their own transformative fires. On the small moon of Thalos, in the kitchens of the galaxy's most advanced culinary institute, and in countless places between. The work continued. Fire had been humanity's first teacher, and through programs like this, it continued to teach, not just humans, but all species willing to learn that true mastery came not from controlling nature, but from understanding their place within its endless transformations. The ember of knowledge, first sparked in the desert of Thalos during a desperate challenge, had grown into a steady flame that illuminated new possibilities across the galaxy. And in that light, ancient and eternal, the future of cooking, and perhaps of consciousness itself, continued to unfold. One spark, one flame, one transformation at a time.